The bride had me seated in the kitchen at my son's wedding. I saw the text message where she called me a problem to be hidden. So I smiled, made a quiet phone call to the bank, and canceled every payment for their wedding and their new apartment. Please subscribe and hit the like button. It helps stories like this be heard. And write in the comments what city or country you are listening from. It always warms my spirit to see how many of us there are. And now enjoy the story. My name is Alina. For most of my life, I defined myself in simple, proud terms. I was a mother. I was a widow. I was the keeper of a quiet, orderly home filled with books and the lingering scent of lemon polish. My son, Daniel, was my greatest joy and my anchor. After his father passed when he was 10, it was just the two of us against the world. We didn't have much, but we had enough. I worked as a paralegal for a small firm, and the rhythm of our life was one of careful budgeting and deep, quiet love. We communicated in shared looks over homework, in the way he'd make me tea after a long day. I saw Daniel through college, my heart swelling with a pride that felt like it could mend every past hurt. He graduated, got a good job in the city, and met Chloe. I wanted to be the easygoing mother-in-law, the one who didn't cling. So when Chloe entered the picture, I welcomed her with open arms. She was bright, ambitious, with a laugh that could fill a room. Daniel's eyes lit up when he looked at her, and that was enough for me. The first hint of a fault line wasn't a quake, but a subtle shift in the ground. It was in the way Chloe began to talk about our home, the one Daniel grew up in. "It's so cozy, Alina," she'd say, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Such a vintage neighborhood." She'd talk about loft apartments, about open concept living, about potential. I'd laugh it off, assuming it was just a young person's enthusiasm for modern style. Then came the talks about the wedding. It started as a small, backyard affair in my mind, something simple, heartfelt. Chloe had other visions: a venue by the water, a 5-tier cake, a band, not a DJ. Daniel, besotted, echoed her dreams. "We want it to be perfect, Mom," he'd say, squeezing my hand. I saw the price tags in my head, the numbers adding up to a sum that could have been a down payment on a house, but I wanted his happiness. I had a modest life insurance policy from my husband, money I'd been saving for a true emergency or perhaps a comfortable retirement. It sat in a savings account, a digital number that represented security. One evening, over dinner at my house, Chloe laid her hand on mine. "Alina, we found the most magical place. It's everything, but the deposit is substantial." Daniel looked at me, his expression a mix of hope and guilt. "We could cover some, but with the new apartment lease," his voice trailed off. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. I looked at my son's face, at the man he'd become, and I heard myself say the words that would set everything in motion. "Let me help. Consider it my gift to you both." The relief in their eyes felt like warmth. The transfer I made the next day felt like a slow, cold leak in a boat I was still sailing. From then on, my role was clear. I was the benefactor, but also the student. Chloe's taste was the final word. My suggestions, a local florist I knew, a family friend who baked, were met with a patient, condescending smile. "That's sweet, Alina, but we have a vision." The "we" was always Chloe and Daniel. I was on the outside looking in, my checkbook my only point of entry. I swallowed my feelings, telling myself this was what letting go felt like. This was what a mother did. She receded, she supported, she paid. The money from my security fund began to flow for the venue, the caterer, the photographer whose portfolio was, according to Chloe, the only one that captures true emotion. I met Chloe's parents only a few times. Her father was a loud, jovial man in finance who talked in percentages. Her mother, Cynthia, was a woman of sharp angles and sharper judgments. She surveyed my home, my life, with a polite, distant curiosity, as if studying a museum exhibit of a bygone era. At our final dinner before the wedding, Cynthia leaned over the table. "It's so admirable," she said, "how you've managed on your own, and so generous of you to contribute to the wedding. Daniel says you've been simply invaluable." The word invaluable hung in the air, meaning both everything and nothing. It was the word you used for a helpful tool you didn't plan to keep. The week of the wedding, I was assigned tasks. Picking up linens, confirming the bakery delivery time. I was happy to do them. It made me feel useful, connected. I clung to those tasks. The rehearsal dinner was at a club to which Cynthia belonged. I wore my best dress, but I felt invisible among the sleek decor and the conversations about golf scores and stock portfolios. Daniel was distracted, pulled in a dozen directions by Chloe's family and friends. At one point, I caught his eye and waved. He gave me a quick, strained smile before being pulled into a conversation with Chloe's uncle. I stood by the window, holding my glass of wine, feeling like a ghost in my own son's life. That night, I pushed the feeling down. Tomorrow was his wedding day. Joy, I told myself. Choose joy. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. A good omen, everyone said. I woke in my quiet house, the silence feeling deeper than usual. I performed my slow, familiar morning ritual, the movements grounding me. I took extra care dressing, putting on the navy silk sheath I'd bought for this day. It was elegant, simple. I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing my husband's eyes in my own, seeing the years of single motherhood on my face. Be happy, I whispered to my reflection. He's happy. The venue was a transformed waterfront space, all glass and twinkling lights. It was breathtaking. I felt a pang seeing it, knowing my money had helped build this beautiful stage. I pushed the thought aside and looked for my place. I was to help with the final floral arrangements, a task Chloe's planner had texted me about. At 7 a.m. I found a side room where hydrangeas and roses were being frantically wired into arches. I rolled up my sleeves and worked for 2 hours, my fingers growing sticky with sap, my good dress protected by a makeshift apron. By the time I was done, guests were arriving. I hurried to the restroom to clean up. I smoothed my hair, reapplied a little lipstick, and took a steadying breath. This was it. I walked out into the main hall, the space now filled with the soft murmur of voices and the gentle melody of a string quartet. I looked for the seating chart, a large, ornate display near the entrance. My name wasn't on it. I blinked, thinking I must be looking in the wrong section. Family of the groom. I scanned the list again. My brother's name was there, my cousin's. But not mine. A low buzz started in my ears. One of the wedding coordinators, a young woman with a headset, noticed my confusion. Can I help you find your seat, ma'am? I'm a leaner, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. The mother of the groom. I don't see my name. Her eyes flickered with professional concern. Oh, let me check the master list. She consulted a clipboard, her finger running down a page. She stopped. A faint, uncomfortable blush crept up her neck. Ah, I see. It looks like your seat it's at table 9 in the kitchen annex. The kitchen annex, the words felt foreign in my mouth. It's just through that door, she said, pointing to a swinging door beside the main catering station. It's a lovely spot, really, quiet, and you'll have a perfect view of the service monitor. She gestured to a small television screen mounted in the corner, currently showing a test pattern. I stood frozen. The hum of the party around me seemed to recede, replaced by that same industrial refrigerator hum from my premonition. I looked across the room. There, at the beautiful sweetheart table adorned with roses, sat Chloe and Daniel, laughing at something her father was saying. Daniel looked up, his gaze passing over the crowd. It passed over me. He didn't search. He didn't notice me standing there, unmoored. The coordinator was still talking, her words a distant echo. Space constraints with the last-minute additions from the bride's side had to make some adjustments. Last-minute additions. Cynthia's sister's family, who decided to come after all, given my seat. In that moment, the truth didn't hit me like a slap. It settled over me like a fine, cold dust. This was not a mistake. This was a placement. The kitchen. The monitor, out of sight but technically present. I was an operational detail to be managed. A piece of logistics that didn't fit the final aesthetic of the day. The coordinator looked at me with pity. That pity was the final spark. I felt my face move, my cheeks lifted, my lips curved. I smiled. It was a calm, empty smile that didn't reach my eyes. Thank you, I heard myself say, my voice remarkably steady. Table 9 in the kitchen. How thoughtful? I turned and walked toward the swinging door. With each step, the cold dust of realization hardened into something solid, something clear. This was the line, and I had just crossed it. The kitchen was a world of controlled chaos. Chefs barked orders, servers swept in and out with trays, the air thick with the smell of seared meat and steam. My table was indeed in an annex, a small tiled alcove off the main kitchen meant for staff breaks. A single folding chair was pushed up to a stainless steel table bolted to the wall. A paper place card with Alina written in Chloe's elegant script sat on it, a cruel parody of formality. I sat down. A server, a young man with kind eyes, did a double take. "Ma'am, are you lost? Guests aren't really supposed to be back here." "This is my assigned seat," I said, keeping the smile on my face. He looked at the place card, then back at me, confusion and horror dawning. Oh, wow, I'm so sorry." "It's quite all right," I said, and in a strange way it was. The raw brutality of the placement had sterilized the wound. The pain was there, deep and profound, but it was numb. He brought me a plate of food from the first course, setting it down with awkward care. "Can I get you a drink? Wine? Champagne?" "Water is fine," I said. "Thank you." I sat and I watched the service on the small monitor. I saw my son stand at the altar, his face filled with love. I saw Chloe glide toward him, a vision in white. I heard their vows as a faint, tinny echo through the TV speaker, competing with the clatter of pots. I watched Cynthia dab tears from her eyes, her seat in the front row, center aisle. I did not cry. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, that same quiet smile on my face. I was a statue of a mother at a wedding. The server, whose name tag read Marcus, kept checking on me. He refilled my water glass without being asked. During a lull, he leaned against the counter. "This is messed up," he said quietly. "Family, mother of the groom," I said. He let out a low whistle. "Man. And you're just sitting here for now," I said, and my voice had a new quality to it, a resolve that was finally matching the calm. The reception speeches began on the monitor. Cynthia gave a glowing tribute to her perfect daughter. Chloe's father joked about gaining a son, then Daniel stood up. He thanked Cynthia and his new father-in-law for their warmth. He thanked his friends for their support. His voice cracked with emotion. He looked out at the crowd. "And finally, to my mom," he said. The camera panned vaguely over the audience. "Thank you for everything. I love you." He said it to an empty chair, to a room where I was not. He didn't question it. He didn't scan the room for me. He just said the line that was expected and moved on. That was the second escalation. The first was the physical exile. The second was the emotional erasure, performed live for an audience. It was as if I had already ceased to exist. Marcus saw my expression shift just for a second. He brought me a slice of the wedding cake on a small china plate, even though dessert service hadn't started. "On the house," he muttered. It was an act of kindness from a stranger that underscored the utter failure of kindness from my own. As the music started for the first dance, I stood up. My legs were stiff. I smoothed my silk dress. I walked out of the kitchen, through the bustling staff, and into the main hall. I stood at the edge of the dance floor in the shadows. I watched my son hold his new wife, their foreheads touching, lost in a world that had no room for me. They looked beautiful, they looked complete. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Cynthia. Her expression was one of polished concern. "Alina, there you are. We missed you at the speeches." "Everything all right?" Her eyes held a challenge, a dare for me to make a scene. I turned my calm smile on her. "Everything is perfect, Cynthia. Truly, the wedding is beautiful. You must be so pleased." My tone was gentle, agreeable. She seemed momentarily thrown. "Well, good. We did our best. It's a tight squeeze with everyone, you understand." "Of course," I said. "It's all about family." She patted my arm, a dismissive gesture, and floated back to her table, her mission of managing the potential problem complete. She believed she had won. She believed I was compliant, defeated, a woman who would accept a seat in the kitchen with a quiet thank you. She had no idea that the woman she just spoke to was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone who had been forged in the heat of that kitchen's humiliation. Someone who was no longer just a mother but a strategist. The emotional cost had been extracted, the receipt printed in my soul. Now it was time to assess the financial one. I did not stay for the bouquet toss or the sparkler send-off. I slipped out as the party reached its peak, the noise a wall of celebration I had no desire to penetrate. The night air was cool against my skin, a relief after the kitchen's stifling heat. I drove home in a silence so deep it felt audible. My mind was not racing, it was methodically, coldly assembling a ledger. The house greeted me with its familiar shadows and silence. It didn't feel like a refuge anymore. It felt like evidence of a life that had been deemed small, vintage, insufficient. I didn't change out of my silk dress. I went straight to the small, neat desk in the corner of the living room, the one that had been my husband's. I turned on the lamp, its pool of light cutting through the dark. I opened the filing cabinet drawer labeled Finances. I pulled out a folder marked Daniel's wedding. Inside were every receipt, every invoice, every bank transfer confirmation. The sums, which I had previously viewed through a lens of sacrificial love, now looked different. They were entries in a ledger of disrespect. The venue deposit, the caterer's first and second payment. The photographer's full fee paid upfront at Chloe's insistence to secure his genius. The florist, the cake, the linens, I had paid them all directly from my savings, the account now significantly depleted. A new, chilling thought occurred to me. I had been so eager to help, so afraid of being a burden, that I had never asked for a contract, never clarified the terms of my gift. Was it a gift to the couple? Or was I merely acting as a bank, funding a production where I was ultimately a stagehand, relegated to the wings? I had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. The days after the wedding were a study in quiet fallout. Daniel and Chloe left for a 2-week honeymoon in Bali. There were no calls from the airport, no texts when they landed. My phone was a silent brick. I told myself they were busy, immersed in their new life. But the silence had a texture to it. It was the silence of a concluded business transaction. I returned to work. The routine of legal documents, of precise language and binding clauses, was a strange comfort. It was a world where actions had defined consequences, where agreements were honored, and where placement mattered. I found myself studying contract law precedents during my lunch break, not for any case, but for my own private, growing understanding. A week after the wedding, Cynthia called. Her voice was bright, chirpy. "Eleanor, hope you're recovering from all the excitement. Wasn't it just perfect?" "It was certainly an event," I said, my voice neutral. "We're so grateful for your contribution," she continued, as if reading from a script. "It really helped bring Chloe's vision to life. Now, Daniel mentioned you have some of the final vendor receipts for the accounting. We're settling all the accounts now, closing the loop." Closing the loop, a neat financial phrase. I looked at the folder on my desk. "I do have the records," I said. "Wonderful. Could you scan and email them to me? I've taken over the final reconciliations. Oh, and just a heads up, the photographer's second assistant submitted an additional hour's charge. A small thing, but we'll need to cover that. I'll send you the invoice." There it was, not a thank you. A request for documentation and a notification of an additional debt. I was being treated as the accounts payable department. The emotional exile of the wedding day was now being followed by a bureaucratic exile. "I'll gather the documents," I said, not committing to sending them. "Great, talk soon," she said, and hung up. That was the third escalation. The assumption of my continued funding, even for incidental costs, coupled with the erasure of my role from the narrative of gratitude. I was a line item. My heart, which had ached with a sharp pain, now settled into a steady, cold thrum of anger. But it was a clean anger, a focused one. It didn't make me want to scream, it made me want to calculate. A few days later, I was watering the geraniums on my back porch when my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Daniel. My heart leapt, a pathetic, instinctual thing. Maybe he was checking in, maybe he'd realized. The text was a photo, a beautiful, sun-drenched picture of him and Chloe on a beach, cocktails in hand. The caption read, "Paradise, Mom, Chloe's parents surprised us and upgraded us to the overwater villa. It's unbelievable. Thinking of you," a casual, almost obligatory phrase, but it was the first part that froze me. Chloe's parents surprised us and upgraded us. I stood there, the watering can dripping onto my shoes. The math did it instantly. The wedding had stretched my savings to a carefully calibrated limit. The honeymoon fund Daniel and Chloe had built was for a standard room. An upgrade to an overwater villa at a resort like that would cost thousands. Thousands that Cynthia and her husband had casually spent as a surprise. And they could. That was the clearest revelation yet. It wasn't about money in a general sense. It was about the flow of money and what it signified. My money had flowed into their event, funding the spectacle that elevated their daughter. Their money flowed to their children as a gift of luxury, of elevation. My contribution was operational fuel. Theirs was a token of love and status. My funding was expected, absorbed into the budget. Theirs was a generous surprise. I was the foundation, unseen and unthanked. They were the decorative pinnacle, celebrated and admired. I went back inside to the desk. I opened my laptop. I didn't look at the wedding folder. Instead, I pulled up the savings account. I looked at the balance, a number that represented decades of frugality, of saying no to little things so I could one day say yes to a big thing for my son. I had said yes, and in return I had been seated in the kitchen and sent a photo of an overwater villa funded by someone else's casual largesse. The shift was absolute. This was no longer just about hurt feelings. This was about value. My value not as a mother but as a person. I had allowed myself to be devalued. I had participated in my own diminishment. I closed the laptop. I looked around my quiet, vintage living room. For the first time, I didn't see insufficiency. I saw peace. I saw order. I saw a life I had built and maintained with my own two hands. It was not a liability. It was an asset. And it was time I started managing my assets with the same clear-eyed precision I used at work. The power balance didn't just reframe, it inverted. They believed they held all the power, the social power, the financial power, the power to place and dismiss. But they had forgotten one thing: I held the receipts. And I was just beginning to understand what those receipts truly represented. The plan did not form in a flash of dramatic inspiration. It crystallized slowly like ice on a still pond, one rational layer at a time. The first, most critical step was to sever the emotional response from the practical action. I was no longer a wounded mother. I was a party to a breached agreement, and I needed to review the terms. I started with what I knew for certain: the law. As a paralegal, I understood the importance of documentation and intent. I spread the wedding folder out on my desk. I created a spreadsheet. Column A, vendor. Column B, amount paid. Column C, date. Column D, method of payment. Column E, recipient of service, wedding of Daniel and Chloe. Column F, payer, Aliner. Column G, notes. It was a dry, clinical exercise that gave my churning emotions a cage to reside in. I worked on it for 3 evenings, cross-referencing bank statements, confirming every debit. The total sum was staggering to see in one column. It was more than I had spent on my own car. It was a number that represented a future cushion, now gone. Next, I needed to understand my legal standing. I spent a weekend in the quiet of the local law library, not at my firm where questions might be asked. I researched gift law, conditional gifts, and promissory estoppel. The situation was murky. A gift once given is generally irrevocable, but context mattered. Had there been an understanding, a condition, even an implicit one, of being treated with respect and inclusion as the mother of the groom? Could the act of being placed in the kitchen after funding the venue be seen as a failure of consideration, a breach of a fundamental implicit agreement? It was a gray area, but the law wasn't my only tool. Social pressure and financial reality often worked faster than courts. My goal wasn't a lawsuit. My goal was restitution and a profound, unignorable lesson. My plan had 2 parallel tracks. The first was financial. The second was social. For the financial track, I drafted a letter, not an email, not a text. A formal, physical letter on crisp, professional letterhead from my employer, a permissible use for personal matters. I did not use my home address. I rented a mailbox at a nearby shipping store for a month. This was my command post. The letter was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Cynthia and Robert Errington, Chloe's parents, with a copy to Daniel and Chloe Masters at their new apartment. I used their formal names. This was business. The body of the letter was a masterpiece of calm neutrality. It began by stating the purpose: Ray, financial reconciliation for the wedding of Daniel Masters and Chloe Errington, held on date. I listed the total sum I had contributed, broken down by major category. I attached copies of the front pages of the key invoices, highlighting the payer as myself. I then wrote the crucial paragraph. While this contribution was initially intended as a gift, the circumstances of the wedding day, specifically my designated placement and treatment as a guest rather than as a contributing member of the immediate family, have made it clear that a fundamental misunderstanding existed regarding the nature of this financial support. As such, I am formally rescinding the gift status of these funds and requesting reimbursement of 50% of the total contributed amount, which represents a fair apportionment given the changed understanding of my role in the event. I was not demanding it all back. That could look vengeful and might be legally harder to justify. 50% was reasonable. It was a figure that said, "You owe me. This was not a gift. It was a cost you should have shared." I gave them 30 days to respond or arrange a payment plan. The social track was more nuanced. I needed allies or at least unbiased witnesses. I thought of Marcus, the kind server. I went back to the wedding venue on a Tuesday afternoon when it was closed for private events. I asked for the catering manager. When he arrived, I introduced myself calmly. "I was a guest at the Masters Orrington wedding 2 weekends ago. One of your staff, Marcus, provided exceptional kindness during a difficult seating situation. I'd like to leave a compliment for him and, if possible, get his contact information to send a proper thank you note." The manager, pleased, fetched Marcus's employee file for me to write the note. I discreetly noted his full name. Later, I found him on social media and sent a private, gentle message thanking him again. I said his kindness had been a beacon on a very strange day. He responded, still mortified on my behalf. "Honestly, it was the craziest thing I've seen at a wedding. You handled it with so much class, my mom would have lost her mind." I had my witness. I also reached out carefully to my brother. I did not unload my emotions. I simply said, "Did you notice anything odd about the wedding seating?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, I couldn't find you. I asked Daniel and he just said you were taken care of. It was weird." He was on my side, confused and concerned. I had my evidence, my formal request, my witness, and a confused family member. The stage was set, but timing was everything. I waited until the day Daniel and Chloe were due to return from their honeymoon. I wanted them to come home to paradise and then, a few days later, have that paradise subtly crack. I mailed the letters via certified mail, return receipt requested. I knew exactly when they were delivered. Cynthia signed for hers at 10:17 a.m. on a Thursday. Daniel and Chloe's was delivered to their apartment building office at 1:42 p.m. the same day. Then I waited. I did not call. I did not text. I went about my life. I pruned my roses. I reorganized my bookshelves. I made myself a perfect omelet. The quiet in my house was no longer empty. It was purposeful. It was the quiet of a drawn bow, the arrow in flight, unseen but destined to land. The first response was not a phone call, but a barrage of text messages from Daniel 12 hours after delivery. "Daniel, Mom, what is this letter? Is this a joke? Daniel, we just got home. We're jet-lagged. This is the last thing we need. Daniel, you gifted that money. You can't just ask for it back because you got your feelings hurt about a seat. Daniel, Chloe is devastated. Her parents are furious. You're causing drama." I watched the messages appear one after the other. I waited an hour, then I replied, a single text, calm and clear: "Me, the letter is not a joke. It is a formal request for reimbursement based on a fundamental breach of our understanding. We can discuss it in person calmly when you've had time to review it properly." The phone rang immediately. It was Daniel. His voice was strained, higher than usual. "Mom, stop this right now. You're embarrassing yourself." "I am perfectly calm, Daniel," I said, my voice level. "The embarrassment, as you call it, was mine to bear when I was seated with the catering staff at a wedding I financed. This is the natural consequence of that action. It was a mistake, a seating chart error. Chloe is crying." "Was it an error, Daniel?" I asked, my tone softening not with forgiveness but with pity. "Did you look for me? When you gave your speech, did you wonder where your mother was sitting?" Silence. A long, telling silence. He hadn't. In that silence, I heard the truth he would never say aloud. "We're not paying this," he said finally, his voice hardening. "You have no legal right." "Perhaps not," I said, "but I have a moral right and I have all the documentation. And I am prepared to share that documentation, along with a statement from a very sympathetic wedding server named Marcus, with every single guest who attended, in a simple, factual account of how their wonderful evening was partially funded. I will also be filing a small claims case. The legal outcome is uncertain. The social outcome for you and Chloe, and particularly for Cynthia and Robert, is far more predictable. Reputation is a fragile thing." I could hear his sharp intake of breath. I had moved the battlefield from family guilt to social currency, the arena where Cynthia lived and breathed. Threatening their reputation was a language they understood perfectly. "You wouldn't," he whispered, horrified. "I am a paralegal, Daniel," I said, my voice like cool glass. "I deal in documents and facts. The facts are not on your side. I will give you and the Orringtons 1 week to discuss a response. After that, my next steps will be automatic. I ended the call. My hand was steady. The true climax came 2 days later, not at my door, but in a public place. Cynthia and Robert asked to meet me at a quiet, upscale cafe. It was an ambush designed to intimidate me with their polished presence. I agreed. They were already there when I arrived. Cynthia looked immaculate and furious. Robert had the stern, dismissive air of a man used to writing checks to make problems disappear. I sat down, ordered tea. Cynthia launched in, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "This is extortion, Alina. It's petty and it's ugly. After all we've welcomed you into." I took a sip of my tea. "This is not extortion, Cynthia. It is an invoice. One you should have expected to pay half of from the beginning." Robert leaned forward. "Let's be practical. You gave the money. It's done. We'll give you $5,000 as a gesture of goodwill to end this nonsense. Put it behind us." I looked at him, then at Cynthia. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 envelopes. I slid one across the table to each of them. "What's this?" Robert snapped. "Open them." Inside were not more demands, but printed, framed-ready photographs. For Cynthia, it was the photo of the overwater villa, the one Daniel had sent me. For Robert, it was a screenshot of my bank transfer to the wedding venue. I had captioned them simply, "The villa photo, a surprise gift of love. The bank transfer, an expected operational cost." They stared at the pictures, their faces paling. "That is the misunderstanding," I said quietly. "You see a generous family. I see a transaction where I was the underwriter. I am no longer willing to be the silent partner in this family corporation, 50%. Or I become a very vocal former partner." Cynthia's mask shattered. For the first time, I saw not a socialite but a scared woman who saw her perfect narrative crumbling. "You'll ruin the first year of their marriage. You'll ruin your relationship with your son." I looked her directly in the eye, my calm and unassailable fortress. "You did that," I said. "When you put me in the kitchen, I'm just presenting the bill." I stood up, leaving my tea unfinished. I placed enough cash on the table to cover it. "You have 5 days left on my deadline. I recommend you use them to decide what your social standing is worth to you. Goodbye." I walked out, leaving them sitting amidst the quiet clatter of the cafe, holding the evidence of their own design. The confrontation was over, the consequence had landed, and for the first time since the wedding, I felt the weight in the air shift from my shoulders to theirs. The payment arrived in my bank account 4 days later. It was not a joint payment from the Arringtons nor from Daniel and Chloe. It was a single wire transfer from an account in Robert Arrington's name. The amount was exactly 50% of the total I had contributed. There was no note, no memo line, no communication. It was a transaction, clean and silent. Its very anonymity was its own message. This was not an admission of guilt, but a settlement, a business decision. Daniel did not call to tell me it was done. The silence from him was the deepest cut of all and also the most clarifying. My son had chosen a side, and it was the side of quiet convenience, of maintaining the new world he had married into. The realization was a dull, permanent ache, a piece of my heart turning to stone. I grieved for the boy I raised, but I could no longer afford to be hostage to the man he had become. A week after the money arrived, a formal, stiff letter came from a law firm representing Robert Arrington. It stated that the wire transfer constituted a full and final settlement of any and all claims related to the wedding expenses and requested a signed acknowledgement. I had my own attorney at the firm where I worked glance at it. "It's standard," he said. "Signing it just means you can't sue them for more money over this specific issue. It doesn't prevent you from speaking your truth." I signed it. I mailed it back. That chapter was legally closed. The social fallout was subtle but permanent. My brother called, having heard a garbled, furious version of events from Daniel. "He says you blackmailed them," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "I presented them with a choice," I corrected gently. "They made one." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The people who mattered to me, the few true friends I had, my brother, once he'd thought it through, understood that a woman does not take such drastic action without being pushed to an unendurable limit. I did not see Daniel or Chloe for months. The first holiday, Thanksgiving, passed with a terse text from him. "We're spending it with Chloe's family this year," I replied. "I hope you have a peaceful day," and I meant it. My peace was no longer contingent on his presence. I used a portion of the returned money to take a small trip, not to Bali but to a cabin in the mountains. I spent a week hiking, reading, and sitting in absolute quiet. I thought about love and how sometimes its purest form is not limitless giving but the establishment of a boundary. A line that says, "I love you but I will not disappear for you." Spring arrived. The geraniums on my porch bloomed a furious, vibrant red. One afternoon, my doorbell rang. It was Daniel. He stood on my porch alone, looking older, tired. He held a pot of white orchids. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I stepped aside. We sat in the living room, the same room where we'd had so many talks over homework, so many quiet evenings. The silence now was a vast canyon between us. "I brought you these," he said, setting the orchids on the coffee table. "They're beautiful, thank you." My tone was polite, measured. The mother who would have wept with joy at his mere presence was tucked away, protected. He struggled for words. I've had a lot of time to think. Chloe and her mom, they have a way of steamrolling things, of having a script." I waited, saying nothing. "I got so caught up in making everything perfect for her, for the wedding, for this new life, I didn't see what was happening. Not until it was too late, not until you acted." He couldn't bring himself to describe what I'd done. That letter, the photos, it was like a bomb went off. Her parents, they were so angry, but not at what happened. "Just that you'd called them on it." He looked at me, his eyes full of a confused pain. "Why didn't you just yell at me at the wedding? Why did you just sit there and smile and then do that?" I took a slow breath. "Because yelling is what people expect from a hysterical mother." A scene would have confirmed their story about me, emotional, difficult, vintage. The smile was my armor, the action was my voice. When you stop speaking someone's language, you force them to finally hear your silence. He looked down at his hands. "I miss you," he whispered, the words ripped from him. My heart clenched, but the stone within it held. "I miss you too, Daniel, but I don't miss who I had to become to earn a place in your new life. The woman who pays and fades into the background." "I don't want you to fade," he said, but the words lacked conviction. He wanted a version of me that was convenient, that fit neatly into the margins of his life with Chloe. "I know," I said, "but that's not a choice you get to make, not anymore. My seat at your table in your life is no longer something you can assign. It's something I choose on terms I can respect." He didn't stay long. There was too much unsaid, too much broken to fix in one visit. But he hugged me goodbye, a real hug for the first time since before the wedding. It felt like a beginning and an ending all at once. I never got the grand apology, the dramatic reconciliation. What I got was something quieter and more real, a fragile, careful distance. We see each other now occasionally for coffee, just the two of us. The conversation is surface level but civil. He is my son and I love him. But he is no longer the sun around which my world orbits. I have reclaimed my own gravity. The moral of this story isn't about winning, it's about cost. There is a cost to betrayal and it is always paid one way or another. And there is a greater cost to losing yourself in the hope of being loved. I learned that forgiveness is not about excusing the action, but about releasing the power it holds over you. And sometimes, the most forgiving thing you can do is to present the bill, collect what's owed, and walk away, leaving their change on the table. If this real-life story resonated with you, if you've ever had to find your voice in a silence you didn't choose, and write in the comments what city or country you are listening from. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories are what make this community. For more calm, reflective tales of love, loss, and quiet strength, thank you for listening.